Chief Policy Analyst at the Ghana Institute for Public Policy Options, Dr. Charles Brobe, has blamed the public's complaints about hardships in the economy on government's poor communication. In an interview with JoyNews' MFA Etiamwa Eli, ahead of the 4th Kojoba Redu Memorial Lectures, which comes off Thursday, October 31, Dr. Brobe said, unlike the late finance minister who took the pain to explain every budget and key economic policy to the Ghanaian in the language they understand, the current administration is taking delight in touting its economic gains by throwing macro and micro figures about, which in itself does not translate into the well-being of the masses, hence their complaints. There's more in the following interaction with MFA.
But the issue is that when you go down on the ground and talk to the people, the phrase you hear is, there is no money in the system. And that means that the hardship for the people in terms of the economic gain is not being translated into benefits into their pockets. So how do you square the circle where the people that look after our economy are saying, we are doing better than everybody else in the world, but the people who cast their votes are saying, what are you doing for us? And it's so the subject of the lectures from macro to micro. How do you translate the much trumpeted economic gains at the macro level to economic benefits and well-being benefits for people for whom you have been elected? Because people forget, if you go to our constitution, it says the purpose of putting a government into power is to increase our well-being. It does not say to increase people's perception of Ghana. It is to increase the well-being of the people. And so you might have yourself a situation where government is doing well according to its own numbers. It is being praised all over the world that the economy of Ghana is doing well. But the people who live in Ghana say, hey, Ghana is ding. How do we make things happen? So that's why we're having this lecture at this stage. That at the end of the day, economic macro gains must translate into micro gains. And that is why we are having this lecture now. And so it is not an academic lecture. It is a real life lecture. Maybe it is happening, but maybe people don't see it happening.
Precisely. That brings me next to my question. You know, if you want to follow people, the process over the period has been the same. You know, this thing about, oh, the economy is hard and we are not feeling it in our pockets, it's not the first time. So should we just use the process from the people in assessing whether really from the micro to macro or from macro to macro has translated into their well-being beyond their process?
No, I think the message is wrong. If you go to many developed countries, they don't trumpet macro numbers. When you go to Trump America, when you go to Boris Britain, when they say the government is doing well, they talk in terms of how many jobs have been created. What's the average income gone up by? What are the opportunities being created? Are house prices gone up or down? Has the economic cost of living, is it going up or down? Are prices in shops going up and down? So translating the so-called macro gains into micro well-being thing is a major challenge for many of the countries in the developing countries, because we don't talk the kind of language that even those who introduce these concepts talk. You know, you very hardly hear talk about, yes, they acknowledge these growth numbers, but they measure success in terms of how many jobs have been created. The Americans every month publish the monthly job figures. They publish the monthly growth in the manufacturing sector. They publish the changes in income. They publish the changes in the cost of living. So there's a messaging problem which is being lost and has been lost for a long time. Okay. And that is why we get this mismatch between what people say at the top and what the reality is on the bottom.
So that is to say that government is not communicating effectively.
It's not just this government. It's been like that. If you listen to our annual budget, one of which is coming up now. Nobody talks in terms of, you know, when you hear the finance minister, they spend an hour talking about the macro environment in the global world, the macro figures that we expect. You know, very little about how many jobs we expect to create from these measures that we are making. So it's not this government alone. And in fact, the reason why I'm doing this is that the person for whom I have done these lectures in memory of was the first finance minister I saw in my life in Ghana, who felt that his job was to translate the macroeconomy as finance minister to the micro levels in terms of what he was trying to do for working people. So, you know, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but when he did the budget, first of all, he was the first person to make a departure from the way in which budgets have been presented in this country. He went and read a speech where he gave an ordinary speech that people could understand, in which he talked about the objectives and the goals of what he was trying to achieve. Not these big numbers of the macro target is this and all of that stuff. Secondly, after that, he introduced what he called the people's budget, in which he would go to the radio stations, mainly with the ones that did vernacular, and would actually try to explain to the people what it was that he was trying to achieve with the budget. And it's very fortuitous that right now there's all this brouhaha about talk-tas. In fact, I think one of Barradio's very last acts as minister before his tragic death was to introduce the communication sales tax in 2008. And the interesting thing is that, first of all, he linked that tax directly to a benefit that he wanted to create. And so it's the first tax I've seen which actually says this money is going for this purpose. And if you read the CST tax, it says we are raising money to develop our young people. It's stated in there. It's for the youth development program. That's how YEF and all those kind of things are being funded. And the communication of this intent was so good and so well understood that even the telcos said, okay, this is our contribution. We will pay the tax, but we will not pass it on to the consumer. So for the last 11 years of the CST tax, it has not been passed on to the consumer. It's now that they decided, due to the non-consultation, they're going to pass it on. But it must be a lesson to people that it is not taxation people are against. But what is the purpose of taxation? What is the benefit of it to us? Is it going to just buy petrol for gas-guzzling SUVs? Or do we really see there's an intent to help improve the people's well-being? That is what I think we require in this country.
Is this macro and micro figures we are trying to put out there the only way to assess the well-being of the Ghanaian?
Well, it may not be the only way, you know, but you see, economics is not our development. We didn't make economics. We have picked up somebody's, and the question I think you should be asking, really, if I could also turn it around, why is it that those who brought us these things measure them in terms of measure benefits in terms of numbers that the ordinary person can understand, and we don't? You know, it's very, very important. The biggest economy in the world, America, when you read their monthly figures, they talk about employment, etc., etc., etc. The largest, the G20, the G7, everybody talks about how well they are doing in terms of how it is. Because at the end of the day, why do they talk about employment? Employment creates money. Money creates expenditure. You don't want handouts. You want to be employed so that you can decide for yourself.
Like a stakeholder.
Yeah, you're a stakeholder. That is what we are trying to do. Government is not for handouts. You know, so I think that part of the challenge we have, not just for this government, is that how do we make sure that the indicators of well-being are as seen by the people? Because Article 1 of our Constitution is very clear. The power of government is to be exercised to improve the people's well-being. How do I know my well-being has improved? Unless the government is talking the same language to me. I mean, for example, when somebody says inflation has gone down, all that they are saying is that the rate of increase of prices has come down, is slow. It doesn't mean that prices have come down. It means the rate of increase is slowed. So that kind of thing, it sounds exciting that the rate of increase has come down. But whether you like it or not, prices have gone up.
Anyway, let's move on from there. In your assessment, in your personal assessment, the well-being of the Ghanaian, is it better, is it worse now, over the period?
Over which period?
As far as you can remember.
I think that's a very difficult question to
It
say.
shouldn't be difficult.
No, it should be very, very difficult. No, because these things, in a democratic system, one's perception of well-being is what determines what direction they flow. You know, if I were to give an assessment, the economy is doing very well, or a particular government is doing very well, the fact that I talk plenty English doesn't give me any more votes. It gives me one vote, the same as yours. So in general terms, I'm very, very wary of giving assessments of better or worse.
But
If there's a general feeling, you see, that is why I like the phrase, there's no money in the system.
is that to say that you buy into what the masses are saying?
No, it's not.
Agree with them? Because literally,
the
then they are saying that it is not well with them.
There's nothing like masses or educated. The principle of universal democracy is that all of us are worth equal votes. So there are no masses. You see, the trick is that whatever you are doing for the masses, you ought to be able to translate into a language that they understand, that they can see that as improvement in their well-being.
We are not doing it. We are not doing
Of course we are not doing it. If you just stick up there talking about the IMF thinks we are doing well and we are going to be the highest growing economy in the world, and the kind of language that people do not understand, you see. But on the other hand, when you see something like free SHS, there's a lot of implementation issues with it. But many people can see, you know, talking about your so-called masses, you know, many people can see the immediate benefits of a certain expenditure that is removed from them. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about, that they can see immediately a benefit that IMF saying your economy is going to be the best doesn't translate to them. So that's a communication problem. Calm down, as they say.
In your personal well-being, has the macro to micro figures translated into your living, your economic situation?
I'm a retired gentleman, and
you are not dead. You are eating, you are buying, you are doing some kind of.
But you see, but you see, this is one of the problems. If it's ever about me, I would be sitting quietly on my terrace every day enjoying myself.
So it is well with you.
Oh, I wouldn't say it is. I wouldn't say it is well with me. I have lived a life and worked so well that I'm able to look after myself. But that doesn't mean that it is well with everybody else. And my role as a commentator on public discourse is not to trumpet my achievement, but it's to say that whoever puts themselves up to be a public servant, what are they doing, or what they are doing? Is it increasing the public good, the public well-being? So that some people, unfortunately, our society think that when you give handouts, you are doing well. But the same thing that people say, it's better that you teach somebody how to fish so that they can look after themselves. The purpose of societal well-being is to ensure that we are increasing the opportunities for everybody to better themselves. So the state increases the opportunities. The state does not create opportunities for its appointees simply to enrich themselves and have a very good life. The purpose of governance is to increase the common good, the well-being of everybody, the opportunities for people to rise by their own efforts. So that when you take something like free SHS, the fact that people are getting educated, and through education, they are improving their capacity to do better, in a world where education matters. It's one very positive way in which the public well-good is being increased.
Doc, what are patrons attending this lecture expected to take away?
I think they should be able to take away, first of all, their own a better ability to assess when governments start telling us our economy is doing very well. How do they get that to assess whether it is being felt by everybody else? They should be able to assess what do these macro numbers really mean. My own position, for example, is that our economy is growing big now, but what is accounting for the growth is, in my very, very cynical way, I say that the economic growth rate represents how quickly the white man is taking our oil away. Because 80% of the growth is related to oil extraction. Now, when people take the oil away, yes, it looks good, your economy is growing, but very little of that is going to your people, unless then because don't forget, and a very small, only a small proportion of the oil revenue is coming into this country. Yes. So if you are talking about economic growth of 8 or 9%, and 6% of that is attributed to how quickly oil is being extracted, that for me is meaningless in terms of the well-being of your people. That's the kind of thing that I hope that people who come to this lecture will be able to take away and say, okay, let me assess this whole thing. What does it really mean? For the first time, we have the lecturer is a woman, the chair is a woman, very, very accomplished and distinguished people in their own right.
Tell us a bit about the main speaker.
The main speaker, Professor Abdullah Odro, is a professor at the Department of Economics at the University of Ghana, and she's done a lot of work both in teaching and research. She was a foundation member of the Center for Economic Policy Analysis, which was set up by Joabe a few years ago, and it's very, very practical, has served in government, has been on several boards, is currently a member of the board of the Ghana Statistical Service, which of course also has great responsibility in producing economic figures that go to measure well-being at various stages. And the chair is also a former government statistician who now is the chairperson of the Ghana Statistical Board. So we are bringing people who are not just academics, but people whose job it is to, in effect, produce these figures and translate to us what they mean. So it's going to be a very practical and exciting lecture.
Dr. Charles Reku-Brobe there, ahead of the 4th Kojo Redu Memorial Lecture, which comes up tomorrow at the Kofi Annan India ICT Center. Don't miss it for anything, because there will be much more of such interesting food for thought from the main speaker, Professor Abner Ojo. Now, joining me in the studio is my colleague Philip Namfuri, who is our in-house analyst. Philip, a little fact-checking here. Do you agree with Dr. Charles Reku-Brobe when he talks about communication being as important as delivery on economic policies?
Generally I do, largely. If you look at the advanced economies and how they communicate their monetary, fiscal, structural policies, if you come down to our part of the world, we must understand that there's a literacy gap, which we've made some strides towards improving. And at the same time, there's a financial literacy gap. And you've seen how in recent years, particularly from 2017, that financial literacy gap has been exposed with the banking sector and financial sector issues. People don't really have a grasp of it, and people were swayed in so many ways into all sorts of schemes. So largely, communication itself is very important. And with your permission, I want to just read something briefly from an IMF blog. And it says, when it comes to forging economic policy, communicating with the public is no longer an afterthought. Instead, communications are increasingly seen as a policy tool in itself. To be sure, communications can never be a substitute for good policies, but economic reforms are more likely to fail or even be reversed unless they are understood, believed, and accepted by those whom they affect. And this is where our part of the world comes in. And the good doctor was making reference to so many things where they're coming through a lot of numbers about and people don't seem to understand. We have the literacy gap, we have the financial literacy gap, and there should be a way to bridge that gap in our context. Let's look at the budget, for example, which is something that's coming up. He mentioned the people's budget. Now, if you go to the Ministry of Finance website, I think it's called the Citizens Budget. They are supposed to be translations of the budget into other languages made simple for the ordinary man to understand. Sometimes when we have these discussions, it's left alone to the media to do this discussion, and sometimes some of us cherry pick certain issues to the discussion about without giving a proper context of it. So on the communication front, more has to be done with regards to how you disseminate the complex information down to the people. And bearing in mind the literacy challenges in this country, our leaders, policy leaders, should have innovative ways of making it simple. They can partner with us, they can find so many ways of breaking things down for people to understand.
Some place less of an emphasis, and I mean, with the greatest of respect to the IMF and their opinions on communication, but some would place less of an emphasis on communication and say, look, the sweetness of the pudding is in the eating. And so if the economy is performing well, I would measure it by how much I buy fuel for, or how much I pay for electricity, or how expensive food is.
So you just brought up fuel. The economy is made up of several components. Normally in our discussions, we take the macro indicators. That's just one part of it. And we forget the other parts. It's an infusion of different things. So look at fuel prices, for example. Has the government come to explain to the masses that there was a deregulation policy passed in 2015 that ensured that, okay, we will no longer subsidize your fuel products for you, so now it's up to you to pay for it yourself? Have they come to tell us? You and I may understand, but the man on the ground, does he even understand that there's this policy that has said, okay, now government will not pay because government in itself is burdened fiscally? And what is fiscal burdens? Government's revenue is going to servicing three main items. So you see where this kind of discussion comes from. And this whole exchange rate debate. We are exporting mainly gold, commodities, gold, cocoa, oil. What are the revenues coming from this? Have they come to tell us that over the course of time, this is what has happened to our main export earnings? They have reduced, and as such, when there's a CD depreciation, it will affect the amount of what you pay for. So you see, it's all over the place, and all these things have to have sort of let me use the Venn diagram. 1, 2, 3. The thing they made.
The intersection.
Exactly. Something where we can all meet, where they can come and tell us what they are doing. We can also understand, and that gap will be bridged.
It's an important point you raised. But there's also the issue of data, and how data in Ghana is generally not available.
I like that one. Dr. Reku-Brobe was mentioning the US and some of the indicators. Ghana, we have, when the Bank of Ghana comes with its bi-monthly monetary policy committee, we have the budget, and we have the monthly inflation. He mentioned jobs. The US has, every month they come out with their non-farm payrolls and come and tell us how much the US economy has added in jobs. Do we have that in Ghana here?
No.
No. Look at the informality in our economy. How are we going to tell if Kokomlemle Mall has added 2 new members to their staff? It will be difficult.
And Kokomlemle Mall is a shop where we buy general goods from.
Gathering that data is a difficulty. So you realize that the advanced economies have different metrics with which they use. Look at this now. He even mentioned the manufacturing industry. The Purchasing Managers Index, that's what measures the health of the manufacturing industry. What's Ghana's manufacturing industry like? Like Stanbic Bank just launched this PMI metric recently. Do we understand it? Can we go down and stop a taxi driver and ask him, how is the manufacturing industry faring? So you see that there are so many things we need to do. First, I think, in my opinion, we need to build or bridge that gap, the literacy and financial literacy. Then from there, when government comes out with a plethora of policies, they should explain it properly. We normally pick the ones that sell free SHS. Then everybody jumps around it. It's very easy to understand. Your child will go to school freely. But have they come to explain the funding constraints that come with the free SHS?
92% of the education budget of our oil fund goes to that, for instance.
Have they? No. Everybody wants to work with the government for one reason or the other. Have they come to explain to us that a chunk of our revenue, which we are suffering to generate because a lot of people in the sector are informal, is not helping us pay wages and compensations, which is affecting what we have to use for capital expenditure, which we have to go and borrow from to do. So you realize how mixed it is. It's not
interesting.
Yes, it's not a one-score discussion.
Yeah.
It's very elaborated.
It's an interesting one. Perhaps we should have, time with Philip every day.
Perhaps.
For Philip to break down the economic numbers for us. But thanks, Philip Nafri, for joining us. He's our analyst here at Joy Business.